This is a podcast by the Straits Times.
Be relevant, be curious, and be memorable. Some of the most memorable interviews and actually colleagues I ended up working with oftentimes will actually flip the script on an interview.
You're listening to Career Talk. Every second Monday of the month, the Straits Times helps you put your career on the right footing from the outset. I'm your host, Tay Hong Yi. As skill demands and job complexity increase with increasing advancement of an economy, so do employer needs, as reflected through their expectations in job interviews. The stakes are especially high for candidates seeking a foot in the door at cutting-edge companies in the technology sector and beyond. Thankfully, we have a guest well-placed to demystify the process and help you put your best foot forward for the job you desire. He is Mr. Huang Wen, Asia Pacific Chief Technology Officer for information technology consultancy SoftServe. Spearheading the regional technology strategy and advisory team for the firm, Mr. Huang has 25 years of experience leading global teams across financial services, digital media, enterprise software, and smart cities. It's great to have you here with us, Wen.
Well, thank you, Hong Yi and the team for having me today.
And, you have had so much experience across so many sectors through a tech lens. When it comes to the most highly competitive and desired roles in the sector, what are we looking at for interviews, be it for technical roles or, non-technical corporate roles?
Yeah, so I would say over my career, and I've served in roles starting from a software developer, so I've gone through software engineering type tests, moved into product management, which you could say had a foot in the door of both engineering and business, and really the last 10 years in more management and leadership roles across both large and small companies. One of the probably most common themes that hasn't changed is the desire for an organization to find the right type of individuals that ultimately can do the job that is posted today, but also demonstrates both something different, maybe something, a lot of what we talk about now as culture fits. And ultimately, the third part of this is that ability to then grow and hopefully be with an organization for many years to come. And so be it technology, a technology role, a business role, or something completely different, I think those three things all still matter today. So that ability to have the right skill sets to come in and add value, that ability to fit into the culture of this particular organization, and of course, lastly, the demonstrated potential to continue to grow, to evolve, and to excel as people build their careers within that company.
So in this search of talent to match all these requirements, are we seeing commonly interviews with a lot of intensive stages successively, even for relatively junior roles, for example?
A lot will depend on the type of company that you as be it a college grad or maybe a couple of years into the market type professional. But for some of the larger companies, and I've had the sort of privilege of working in large companies such as Amazon and Oracle in my days, we actually try and streamline the process as much as possible, because if we think about the investment in interview for each candidate, a candidate may spend ultimately anywhere between 6 or 7 hours of in-person conversations, perhaps up to another full day to either do preparations, maybe case study work, and then from a hiring standpoint, that amount typically can be a couple days of collective time for the actual interviews, the debriefs, and then multiply that by, for every role, depending on company, you might have one hire out of every, I think the last numbers could be around 5 to 10 candidates that you actually interview in person. So it's a huge amount of time and resources that are invested, not just from a candidate standpoint, but also from a hiring standpoint. So the goal, though, is to try and strike that balance of how do we get enough information as a hiring manager, as a hiring organization, but also not make it so cumbersome for the candidates and also cumbersome for the organization that it becomes impossible to actually hire and get your day job done.
What can make a company so attractive that candidates still apply for roles even if they require several intensive interview stages?
So I think it will depend on the individual, to be honest. But a couple of things that I've seen, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, it could be the brand recognition of a company, especially if you're starting out and you want to accelerate your career. Joining a big brand name like one of the FANG companies is definitely a great way to get started, to get exposed to sort of leading or global leading talents, colleagues, products and services. So that's one. Another one that I've seen increasingly more and more, especially with a younger generation, is what is the vision? What's the mission of an organization? And I think this is one where, as SoftServe, we've been very fortunate to attract really great global talent because of who we are, what we value, and then the emphasis that we place on our people and their development. So I would say that those are probably two big attractions. The third one oftentimes will be very simply, what is the space that this organization is in. These days, I think AI is all the rage. So you'll see lots of applications, lots of interest in joining AI firms. Even if you're not in a data or engineering specific role, it could be sales and marketing, operations. And again, with SoftServe, since we do quite a bit of AI and data work, we also have been very fortunate to have some truly outstanding data scientists, data engineers come knocking on our door asking if there's room for them in our team.
Using your current company as an example, could you outline the stages in the interview process and break down what goes on at each stage?
Yeah. I think the good news for those listening is our process will be fairly similar to many of the top engineering firms or software firms around the world and certainly around this region. Usually it will start with a quick conversation with the recruiter. So if you've applied directly, they'll spend a little bit of time to explain what the role is, what the company stands for, and just get a general gauge of interest to make sure that we're proceeding down a path that makes sense. After that, there will be a phone screen that is a combination of both, again, typically from a hiring manager that would look at, do you have roughly the right skills, the experiences for this particular role? And also, again, for us, very importantly, to start sharing and also, just as importantly, letting the candidates have time to ask questions around who we are, what we do, and again, kind of gauge that sense of, is this a right match? Because if after these two conversations, a candidate feels like it's not the right fit, or we feel like maybe perhaps this is too early of a conversation, it allows for both sides to bow out gracefully. Because after that, if we talk about a technical role, they'll typically go through two more technical rounds of conversations. And this is where we do the deep dive into whether you understand perhaps the programming languages, the frameworks, or even the broader designs of systems or architecture that is typically required for an engineer or an architect that would join us. And the last round, it would be with a couple colleagues, so potentially peers and also leaders within our organization that is more around experiences and culture fit. So then, in what is essentially 3.5 rounds of conversations, we're able to get a good sense of sort of the technical capabilities, your experience, sort of level set, your seniority, if you will, and then very, very importantly, an opportunity for both sides to understand what the culture is and whether or not this is a place that a candidate would really enjoy and thrive in.
So I think for technical interviews, it's quite clear cut. But when we are talking about these softer aspects, such as in the culture fit interviews, could you maybe share with us, how do you go about it? What are the questions being asked? What do you look out for if you have set into one of these interviews?
Yeah, so actually last year I think I conducted close to, I was just sharing this, about 100 in-person interviews for roles that range from architects and consultants to the broader sales team and operations. In my role, I specifically look after our advisory team. So these are usually industry experts with 10 plus years of experience at a minimum. Our architects, who are, if you think about it from a software engineering standpoint, would have, again, sort of maybe 10 plus years of software development or DevOps infrastructure experience, and they've now moved into more senior leadership type roles. I look out more from a culture standpoint. Are they a fit? Now, to your question, things like culture, typically we can ask what would be, we call them behavioral type interview questions. So it's more about, tell me about a time when you've had a difficult customer conversation, or tell me about a time that you saw a opportunity or a problem that no one was addressing within the customer or the internal organization. What did you do about it? So these are the types of questions that give us a sense of how people have reacted and behaved in the past. And it's a great indicator of also the types of kind of behaviors and personality that they would have going forward. The other piece of that is also for SoftServe, we look at certain culture fit aspects. Do you have a sort of a general, we'll call it, ownership mentality? Do you treat, would you treat your kind of last company, or did you treat your last company rather as if you were an owner of the company? So therefore, any problem, big or small, you might solve. How do you work well in teams? This is a very important aspect of who we are. What are your experiences across different cultures, understanding and learning? Since we are a global organization, it's not unusual that a team can have 4 or 5 different members scattered across the world that we work in. So these are just some examples of the types of things that we might look at as we go through this interview process.
If so, then how can candidates distinguish themselves in such a competitive and complex process?
I like to describe it as 3 things: be relevant, be curious, and be memorable. And so let me just go through each of these briefly. For number 1, be relevant. The onus is on you as the candidate to understand what the role is and what the company is. I don't see SoftServe, our process, being any different. We're radically different than most other organizations, where within the first couple of rounds, you should already have the opportunity and a sense of what the expectations are for this particular job, the interview you're actually going for, or the job you're actually going for, and enough opportunity to either have done the research and ask questions around the company and the team that you might be a part of. So the be relevant part is to be able to matchmake your experiences, whether they are 100% fit or they might be relevant enough to shape that story in the remaining part of this interviewing process, so that people can go, okay, we understand this candidate has roughly the right skills and has really understood enough to showcase that how they work, their values are aligned with our values, like in SoftServe's case. So that's be relevant. Be curious. Some of the most memorable interviews and actually colleagues I ended up working with oftentimes will actually flip the script on an interview, if you will, and they will start asking questions even before the end of the interview. They will turn the interview into more of an engaging, more of a conversation, more engaging, and it's not because they feel like that's the right thing to do. In fact, I don't think there's too many things I've come across that say, like, direct the conversation or ask questions and break up the format of the interviewer, right? But these folks have demonstrated a natural curiosity because they were so interested in how our business ran. I had a recent hire that actually we spent the first half an hour, the first time we met, with him simply just peppering questions around how are we doing, the customers that I could share about, what's working, what's not, and it felt felt more like he was interviewing me than vice versa. So that curiosity, that research you do beforehand, and then being able to demonstrate and apply that certainly will help you stand out. And then the last one is be memorable. I feel like I've learned this lesson maybe a little too late in life, but storytelling is probably the most single powerful tool, especially a college graduate can and should learn. We used to call it, I would almost more crassly say your personal brand actually really matters, but I prefer to think of it as what is your story? And if you think about all your time in public education and then uni or if you went to poly or diploma, you've collected some great experiences. You have a point of view of the world. You're actually not entering the workforce completely without experience, and that story that you're building is going to actually be important, and it's going to evolve over time, and that, I think, ultimately is what makes someone memorable. Is if you know who you are, or you have an inkling who you are today, being able to infuse that personality, being able to add some relevant stories or data points also helps to make you stand out. Because at the end of the day, last one role I had 100 applicants for this one role, and separating people by, do you have the skills, do you have the experience, it's very non-differentiated. But the folks who came in that were curious, that clearly spent the time to just go, hey, I'm really interested and here's why it would be a great fit. And then very importantly, were able to demonstrate their personality and that sense of that uniqueness helps them to stand out. And people will remember, oh, that person. Yeah, I remember him telling a story about rock climbing in the Andes, as part of his overall brand of someone who is venturous, who does take risks, but also, is a strong team player. Right. That's I think the three things. So be relevant, be curious, be memorable.
So are you seeing the bar being raised among candidates, especially young candidates, since you began interviewing them?
Absolutely. It's maybe a couple things. Maybe it's the education system here in Singapore. It might be the water, for all we know. Certainly upbringing. And also just a couple more tactical things. There is a wealth of knowledge out there. These days, a simple Google for your favorite big company or even small company or smaller company like ours, you can find a lot of very interesting information about the interview process, who the people are, very importantly, a sense of the culture and style. I mean, if you go on LinkedIn and look at SoftServe and just scroll through our feed, you'll have a really good sense of the type of work that we do, the personalities we have, right? So I think that bar gets raised because there's access to information that is readily available. You don't have to go and call 10 different friends to get a sense of the company. So that's definitely one. The other is the opportunities that are afforded to the younger generation these days. It's absolutely mind-boggling. We have two, they're not fresh out of college anymore, but they're 1 or 2 years out, and they both happen to come from the defunct NUS Yale program in I think it was actually physics and math. One of them had a paper published in Nature as part of before he even graduated, and joined us as an intern. And of course, we brought him on full time. So there's remarkable opportunities and accomplishments that the younger generation also now has the ability to actually do to celebrate. And I think when you're choosing people to join your team, and you have people who have actually had scientifically published papers joining fresh out of college, that absolutely raises the bar in terms of talent and capabilities.
So do you think that as the bar continues being raised, is there a chance of it being possibly unrealistic in terms of how much someone has to have their ducks in a row before they're applying for their first role out of college? It's
a lot like matchmaking. There are always going to be organizations that thrive and need that high caliber of talent. At the same time, there are also many organizations that do great work, have great culture, and we'll call it sort of missions that a younger generation can look into and be a part of, that may not need the kind of the wealth of experiences coming straight out of college, or even the first 2 years that perhaps some of these larger sort of FANG companies, where specialist engineering firms like ours, really kind of require. And I think the unrealistic aspect really comes from trying to take who you are, realistically, what is it you want to do, and try and apply for a company that actually isn't the right fit for you at this point. And I think that's probably where I see the most sort of disjointed kind of expectations sort of being, we'll call it, unrealized.
So just to latch onto your point about flipping the script, now it's my turn to flip the script.
Sure.
In terms of, what was the toughest interview you ever participated in yourself as a candidate? And why was it that difficult? How would you do it differently now?
Great question. Toughest interview I had, I'm actually going to go with my very first interview out of college, or rather the first job I got. And why I still remember this interview was I had a chemical engineering undergraduate, and back in the day I realized that that wasn't going to be a career that I was going to be excited by. And I happened to dabble just enough in computer science to, apply for jobs in the then not so exciting computer software days. I'm very, very old, and the reason why it was a tough interview was because I had 2 back-to-back interviews where it was the hiring manager and then his lead architect. And I just remember sitting through this lead architect interview, and he's asking all these different questions in terms of deep diving into programming language, into algorithms, and a lot of this I knew I didn't know. And I'm sitting here thinking, do I need to make up answers for something, or should I justify? And I actually just went with the default, my default response, my character, and I just said, I have no idea. And I still remember I actually said those words, and I said it a couple times. And sure enough, about a week later, I get a call from the hiring manager. I'm thinking they're probably calling saying, hey, thanks for the interview. We've decided to pass on you. And he said, yeah, we'd like to bring you in for a round of in-person interviews. And I go, are you sure? Because I didn't know any of the questions that were asked. And he said, actually, that's why we're bringing you in, is because you were actually honest about what you didn't know, and you answered the things you did know, you were able to confidently express. And so I think the reason I say this the toughest interview is because I was fortunate at an early stage of my career to recognize that if it's the right job for you, if it's the right company, being true to who you are, being honest to what you can and cannot do, is so much better than trying to fake your way into getting into a job that you either believe you need or believe you really, really want to be a part of.
I really enjoyed that anecdote. So then one last question from me, right, is given all these shifts, both on the supply side, from the talent pipeline, and also on demand side, with the evolving needs of your organization and your clients and the technologies, what are some emerging new ways of sourcing and matching talent to roles that your organization has tried? And why did your organization embark on using these methods?
Yeah, we were actually historically founded by a polytechnic, it's now a university professor, and 4 of his postgraduates. So there was a love of learning, a love of academia that has just permeated throughout SoftServe in our 31 plus years. And in that process, I feel like that our founders, who have now stepped away from day-to-day activities but are still very, very active, haven't forgotten how important it is that first role it is out of university. And a couple of years ago, during COVID, we were looking for talent for our then sort of nascent quantum R&D team. And the team in Europe hit on this idea of running a virtual boot camp for university students who were interested in the space but didn't have the right set of experiences. And they might be from comp sci, math, in some cases just liberal arts background, but they love the idea of quantum computing. And over 8 weeks, we essentially hired and treated them as interns. They learned the what we call sort of cross-disciplinary skill sets around quantum computing, software engineering. And at the end of that period, it gave actually both sides a great opportunity to go, would this be a company that you would want to continue on with? And then also for us, we had, I think at the time, 12 participants who we could then sort of also look at and go, who would we want to join? And we were very fortunate to have a couple that actually joined. So the following year, because it was so successful, we decided, why not do this in Singapore? We were very fortunate that one of our first early hires here was actually, again, fresh out of college, one of the two NUS Yale graduates I mentioned, and said, why not run something similar to that here in Singapore? And given that he already had sort of experiences with the Center for Quantum Technologies based at NUS, we reached out, and next thing you know, we get wonderful support from the Singapore government, from some of the big players here, IBM, AWS, NVIDIA, just to name a few. And collectively, we were able to create a 8-week boot camp that not only trained 20 plus university students from all 4 of the universities around quantum, basics of software development, but also gave them exposure to sort of the latest and greatest in hardware, what's happening in the industry, providing lectures. So it was a great experience for these students, but also at the same time, it gave us 8 weeks to work with potential future interns and hires for us. And I think that's actually a wonderful way going forward for us, where we can mix what I would consider to be a ecosystem play. So it benefits the ecosystem. It raises the profile of either a technology or a particular industry, and it brings in new talent, gives them exposure, gives them better data points and experience to say, do I want to build a career? And at the same time, it also allows them to, we'll call it, to network with some of the biggest companies in that space. So that's one way we assess and we attract new talent is we invest in them, and then we also take the time to also get to know them better as people and also as budding young talents.
And I think that's a very encouraging note to end off this podcast. Just really wanted to thank you, Wen, for taking your time to appear on our podcast. That was Mr. Huang Wen, SoftServe's Chief Technology Officer in the Asia Pacific. Well, that's a wrap for this 13th episode of Career Talk. I'm Tay Hong Yi. If you resonate with the points raised, do share this podcast episode with your friends and family. Please feel free to share with us if the interview tips we spoke on worked for you. You can also get more career and personal finance tips in the latest edition of ST's Head Start newsletter. We have all the links in our show notes too. I'll be back on the second Monday of every month with Career Talk.